Welcome, everyone. My name is Adam Savitt. I'm Director of Communications at the Center for Security Policy. Pleased to welcome you back to our Voter Education Project series. We're holding webinar events meant to educate the American voter on crucial national security issues every week, right up until Election Day. So be sure to check out the full schedule and register at securefreedom.org. Today's program is entitled Hackable Elections, Cyber Threats, and Foreign Interference Threats to U.S. Elections, featuring our guests, Hans von Spakovsky, Kevin Freeman, and Russ Ramsland, and moderated by my center colleague, Tommy Waller. Please note that you are in listen-only mode, but you can submit your text questions in the Q&A box on your GoToWebinar control panel, and I will read those questions out loud at the end of the program. This event is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/securefreedom, as well as our website, securefreedom.org. With that, hand it over to our center's Director of Infrastructure Security, Tommy Waller.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. Most of you on the webinar are likely familiar with the Center for Security Policy. For anybody who's new, just understand we are a nonprofit, 501c3, nonpartisan organization. We don't take any money from any level of government or any international sources. And our mission is to help shape national security policy to secure freedom. Part of that freedom is the ability for all of us to govern by the people, for us to be able to elect officials to represent us in Washington and elsewhere throughout the country. And that is an incredibly important part of our system. And it's a part of our system that enemies of freedom seek to attack and seek to influence. These enemies of freedom have a lot of different ways that they can influence and attack this election process, this election system. We've heard the term hacking before. In fact, most of the time when you hear the term hack, you might think just a cyber attack. But there are a lot of other methods. There's a lot of workarounds. The term hack can be used, a life hack, for example, as a workaround. And it's unfortunate, but it's true that there are many vulnerabilities of our election system that would enable enemies of freedom, foreign and domestic, to hack our elections. The experts that we have today with us, I'm not going to go into great detail on their background. We're going to put that in an article that'll be on our website afterwards. But Hans von Spakovsky is a nationally known expert in all matters related to elections. He's actually served on the Federal Election Commission and is consistently interviewed by media sources and depended upon by policymakers for his wisdom in this area. Russ Ramsland has a vast history with experience in elections, including being a candidate for Congress himself. He's also deeply involved in cybersecurity and has a lot to share with us about the cyber vulnerabilities associated with our system. And finally, Kevin Freeman. Kevin Freeman is perhaps the nation's foremost expert on economic warfare, and in particular, some of how our adversaries, including Communist China, seek to utilize economic warfare to influence our elections and our country as a whole. So with that, we're going to go first to Hans. And Hans, I very much appreciate the fact that you have consistently been a member both on radio, on television, representing the Heritage Foundation and helping those viewers and listeners of the Center for Security Policy's different media programs understand the vulnerabilities of our election system. I'd like you to explain for our viewers just a few of the processes by which a domestic or a foreign enemy of freedom might target that election system.
Sure, and I appreciate the ability to be here today. Look, part of the problem that we have with our entire election process is that, particularly our voter registration process, is that it's an honor system. You know, most people probably believe that when they fill out a voter registration form and submit it to local election officials, that local election officials go through a process to actually check and verify the accuracy of that information. Unfortunately, they don't do that. They normally just take that information, enter it into their database, and suddenly you're registered to vote. That means that, for example, we have a demonstrated problem of people who are not U.S. citizens registering and voting in our elections, and this is happening all over the country. And we're talking about thousands of non-citizens who are doing that. And that's because while you are supposed to, on the voter registration form, check off a box as to whether you are a U.S. citizen or not, again, election officials don't actually verify that you're a U.S. citizen if somebody checks the no the yes box saying, yes, I am a U.S. citizen. So that allows those kind of problems to creep in. There are also problems with individuals, for example, registering in more than one state and therefore having the ability to illegally vote in more than one state. Why is that? Well, we don't have a national voter registration system. It's based on the states. And there are many states that aren't doing anything to, for example, compare their voter registration lists with other states. California is a big example of that, with one of the largest voter registration systems in the country. All of this means that because of potential administrative errors or people taking advantage of those vulnerabilities, that frankly, it's relatively easy to cheat and to get away with it. Also because election officials, unfortunately, too many of them, even when they find a problem, often won't do anything about it. And even if they do something like, for example, take an ineligible individual off the voter list, like a non-citizen that they find, they don't forward that to law enforcement officials either to prosecute. And that's why, look, we have a database, election fraud database at the Heritage Foundation. It's got 1,300 proven cases of fraud, but that is just the tip of the iceberg of the cases out there.
Well, Hans, and I remember you writing about the fact that the Supreme Court itself, confirmed that
Yes.
election fraud it takes place all the time. So, I'm curious about. I know there are examples, and I think it's worth us discussing some examples. Can you give some examples for our viewers?
Sure. I'll give you some that are just very recent. They're not even in our database yet. Look, just within the last couple of weeks, the Secretary of State of Georgia announced that he has forwarded the names of about 1,000 voters to law enforcement because he's discovered that they voted twice in their June primary. They voted by absentee ballot, and then they went to their polling places and voted in person. The Texas Attorney General has just filed over 130 felony charges against a number of individuals in Texas for engaging in absentee ballot fraud. New Jersey had a municipal election a month or so ago where it was all mail. They listened to all these people saying, oh, you need to have all mail elections because of COVID-19. 4 locals have already been criminally charged by the state attorney general with engaging in absentee ballot fraud, tampering with absentee ballots, and it has resulted in at least one election being overturned and a new election ordered. I mean, there are just examples like that all over the country, unfortunately, demonstrating that, as the U.S. Supreme Court said in a case in 2008, the United States has a long history of voter fraud. It's been documented by journalists and historians, and it could make the difference in a close election. And we have close elections all the time in this country.
Yeah, Hans, I was actually about to mention that. I mean, when we talk about the numbers there, those numbers, maybe it's just a few thousand votes, really could make a difference. And this is something that personally I've noticed that the president, before he was president, 2016, I mean, I remember seeing him on the news talk about the prospect and the reality of election fraud. I noticed last night in the debates that he has not changed his mind. In fact, he is all the more concerned about that. And I thought that it was interesting, the questions that were asked about mail-in voting, mail-in balloting. And so I'm curious if you could kind of share with us those observations. Personally, what I saw was a very stark difference in the way that the president and the vice president, how much they cared, I guess, about the dangers of mail-in voting when it comes to fraud. Can you give us your sense of that, having really been in this area professionally for your entire career?
Yeah, I was actually surprised last night when Senator Joe Biden said there's no proof that there's any fraud when it comes to absentee or mail-in ballots. I mean, I've just cited you a number of examples of that. Again, anyone who doubts that can look at our database. It's filled with absentee ballot fraud cases. And look, there's a reason for that. The reason is that ballots that you mail in are the only kind of ballots that are cast outside the supervision of election officials and outside the observation of poll watchers. Also, there are laws in every state against what's called electioneering in polling places. That means that a candidate can't show up in your polling place and pressure or coerce you to vote for him. Those laws don't apply to people's homes. And one of the common factors, unfortunately, that you see in these kind of cases is voters being coerced and pressured in their homes by candidates, political consultants, and others. We see that evidence of that has just come out in a undercover video done by Project Veritas in Minnesota. Right. The whole operation of doing that kind of thing, particularly apparently targeting elderly voters in Minnesota, who are often a target of these kind of things. Look, that's the fraud issue. But the second problem that everyone needs to understand is basically this. The more people who vote by mail, the more people who are going to be disenfranchised. And the reason for that is that apart from the fraud issue, absentee or mail-in ballots are rejected by election officials at a much higher rate than ballots cast in person. And it's because people make mistakes. You know, they forget to sign the ballot. They don't put all the information that they have to fill out on the back of the ballot when they send it back. Or sometimes the U.S. Postal Service doesn't deliver the ballot in time to be counted, or the U.S. Postal Service forgets to postmark the ballot, and therefore election officials reject it because they don't know if it was voted by the end of election day, which is a requirement. And anybody, again, who doubts that, just look at the primaries that have been held this summer in this election. There are various estimates out, including by NPR, that over 500,000 absentee ballots were rejected by election officials because of one or all of these problems. And that shows you why you're much better off going to your polling place and voting than voting by mail.
Yeah, I completely agree, Hans. And when you talk about pressure, you know, the type of pressure that could be exerted at a polling station is going to be much less than at home. And you touched on it a moment ago, and in the article we published attached to this webinar, I'll make sure we put a link to that Project Veritas video. But right. What you were talking about, I'd like you to expand upon just a little bit, and that was ballot harvesting. Explain for the viewers real quick exactly what ballot harvesting is, and I think they're going to make the connection to the intimidation piece. But tell us a little bit about the problems with that, and any examples that you've seen in that area that are problematic with regard to election integrity.
Sure. Look, in 45 states in the District of Columbia, you normally vote in person, but every one of those states has a provision that allows you to vote by absentee ballot. You have to request the ballot. In most of the states, you don't need an excuse to do that. In about a third of the states, you need an excuse, like you're too sick or disabled to make it to the polling place. You can mail that ballot back. You or a member of your family can personally deliver it to county election officials. But in about half the states, anyone else is prohibited from doing that. Very smart policy. You don't want strangers getting access to your ballots. But unfortunately, in about a little more than half of the states, including places like California, they have legalized what's called vote harvesting. In other words, it is legal for any third party, any stranger, to come to your door and offer to deliver your ballot for you. So what does that mean? It means that candidates, campaign staffers, party activists, political consultants can all show up at your door and offer to deliver your ballot. So what are you doing? You're putting a very valuable commodity in their hands, and there's no guarantee that they won't one, pressure and coerce you to vote a particular way, or tamper with your ballot, or perhaps not deliver your ballot at all if they know that you generally vote for the opposition political party. And you want a good example of this? Just look back 2 years to 2018. The North Carolina 9th District congressional race was overturned by the State Board of Elections because of illegal vote harvesting. North Carolina, fortunately, is a state that prohibits that. But it wasn't just that these political consultants were engaging in vote harvesting. They were also tampering with the ballots, changing the votes of voters on those absentee ballots, forging signatures. And, 7 of them were criminally charged with doing this, and the election was overturned.
Wow. Hans, I appreciate those examples. And these are enemies of freedom. Yeah, it's a criminal charge, but our vote is our method of preserving freedom. And so whether domestic or foreign enemies, these are enemies. And Hans, what you just talked about, I wanted to take 2 concepts that you just mentioned and transition to our next guest. One is you mentioned the problem with someone you don't know who can intrude into this process of you voting, right? In the case that you provided, it was in person. Somebody shows up to harvest your ballot. You also mentioned that they could change your vote, perhaps, by tampering with it after you voted. Russ Ramsland is here to explain how this is exactly what can happen via the cyber domain. Russ provided a briefing for me about a month ago, about a 90-minute briefing that to me was just absolutely mind-blowing. I hate to say it, but it probably didn't surprise a lot of people who are already experts on election security. Russ, I'd like you to pull up, if you would, the video. This is a good, I think, an attention gainer for the group. The video you showed me where in real time, we see votes being changed via essentially a cyber attack. And so I'm going to turn it over, Russ, to you to explain exactly what happens in this video.
Sure, appreciate it very much. What you're looking at is CNN on election night in Kentucky, where Matt Bevin had a very, very surprising defeat to Bashir. Bevin and his colleagues, at the top of the ticket, all the Republicans won by over 200,000 votes in almost every race, and yet Bevin lost by 5,000 votes. So we were asked to come in and look at that, which we did, and we captured this piece of CNN video. Now, let me tell you what you're looking at here, because it's really important to understand this. What you're looking at right here in the gold is actually the live feed from the database. In this case, it's Clarity Elections, which is a Barcelona, Spain multinational company, and they're the last ones that actually have your votes if you're in Kentucky and 28 other states, by the way. It's late in the evening, 95% of the votes are in, and this is the live feed, and then down here is a banner that CNN produces, and these match, as you can see. Bevin's are the same as Bevin's, etc. This gets updated just a moment after this gets updated. So I'm going to play you the video. It's just real short clip. You're going to miss the key point, and then I'm going to go back and show you what was really important and what you missed. But for the first little playthrough, just watch this box. You'll see a real quick update, and then this guy fills the screen. So here we go. It's going on here. Get ready. Here comes the live update. Boom. And now he fills the screen. But that's not the end of the story. Let me show you exactly what you missed when I drag this back and give you a frame-by-frame review of the action. So here we are. The update hasn't come in. Now we're going to move forward frame by frame, and you're about to see the update. Here it comes. Boom. Now you've got the update. Notice that Bashir has 674,508 votes now. Look down below where they haven't yet had a chance to update their little ribbon, and it's 673,948. So Bashir has just gained 560 votes. But now look at Matt Bevin. Matt Bevin now has 661,000 votes, but look down below where they haven't updated it. He did have 662,000 votes. Matt Bevin has gone down 560 votes at the exact same time that Andy Beshear has gone up 560 votes. This incredible piece of video, actually, we were able to find 5 separate occasions on the evening where things like this happen. Most of the time, however, it's an odd number of ups and downs at the exact same moment. But what you just saw was 25% of the vote by which Matt Bevin lost this race get changed. And this all happened from the database itself.
Russ, look, that blew my mind the first time I saw it, and it still does. And what I want you to do is to share with the viewers, we don't have as much time as you gave me, but share with the viewers how this happens. I mean, we're told consistently that, you know, our election systems are secure via the cyber domain, that there's these air gaps. And do me a favor and bring up the graphic that you showed me and break that down for the viewers so they understand exactly what they just saw.
Okay. We're a cybersecurity firm, and so we just took on to figure out how the voting system worked. And this is a little oversimplification, but this is basically what happens. You vote out here in the voting place, and one way or another, your vote gets transported to central counting in your county. And there's poll books and databases, there's tabulation software. This interrogates the database and supposedly reports what's in it. There's reporting software. And then there's this unofficial database that is connected in real time to one of these 4 election night reporting systems. They are all backed up in the AWS cloud, and they all pass through either the Associated Press or Decision Desk HQ to the media. And so you see on election night, what you just saw was the Clarity election database change, 560 up for Beshear, 560 down for Bevin, and the media was capturing it in real time, but they didn't notice. Now, what happens is, what people don't realize is that this function is no longer done by your county. It is done by a private voting company, and there are a bunch of them. Here's a few of them. We investigated all of these. There's also some mid-level companies that conduct elections, people like HARP in Kentucky. They use this equipment, and then they conduct this election. This all came about because in 2002, we had the HAVA Act, the Help Americans Vote Act, which really provided the money for everybody to go to electronic voting. Now, the problem you have in this system is there is no security. Supposedly, there were going to be security guidelines, EAC 2.0. It was never written, and it only applied to the tabulation software had it been written. So there's actually no security standards for the software and the system at all. So what does that mean? Well, for one thing, our guys found we could go to the AWS cloud and utilize what are called S3 bucket vulnerabilities, and we could change the votes right there and then backload them through the system. We also found that you could get into these databases, change the votes, and upload and download the system. We also found numerous ways in the voting place that you could do the same thing, either because of ballot marking devices or because of the software that was downloaded from these companies having algorithms in it that changes votes. We also found that you could actually go straight into the databases at various counties. And of course, that makes it easy if you change votes here or change votes here and you're backloading them here. And then the other thing we found is that this supposed air gap myth, well, that's because there's 2 databases in these systems. There's an unofficial, which as you see is fully connected to the internet and hackable, and then there is the official. The problem is both of these are located behind the same firewall. And so it's very easy for our guys to go in and pivot here and change this database as well. So it's a huge problem, and there just are no security standards that really target.
Russ, I appreciate you mentioning that. The other thing I'd like you to take a moment to just expand a little bit upon. The viewers are looking at the slide right now, and they see the word CITL at the very top middle. What's CITL? Tell us what that is and why we should be concerned.
The reason you should be concerned, CITL is actually a Barcelona, Spain multinational, and they conduct elections all over the world, and they own a company called Clarity Election Night Reporting that they bought in 2002. Their database that we saw was over in Barcelona, Spain. And so all of these votes go from your county and they go up to here. And these are actually the last guys that have your votes and report them. And so it's really amazing to me that we have a foreign multinational company that is housing the votes in 28 states. And 10 of those states are what Rasmussen calls key toss-up states. There's other amazing things. If you go down here and look at SGO Smartmatic, this is a company that we don't even know who owns it, but we know that its chairman is in London, England. So it's a foreign company. And these guys are actually counting votes here as well. It's just amazing how many of all these companies that end up controlling our votes and housing them are not even American companies.
Russ, I know personally when you briefed me on this, it concerned me a lot. I'm assuming that our viewers are concerned. Tell me what the response has been. You've been in this investigation for almost 2 years, and I'm curious to know what kind of response you've gotten from some of the federal agencies or others, policymakers that you've briefed.
Well, unfortunately, the response until very, very recently hasn't been very good. We had tried to get people in Washington, D.C. To take a good look at this, specifically CISA at DHS. They were not particularly interested. We have tried to get other groups interested, state level groups. They don't seem to be interested in doing much about this. In the case of CISA, a lot of this I don't even think they were particularly aware of. A very high placed official at DHS told us that was because CISA actually has no legal authority to do anything. They merely advise. Now, the good news, however, is very recently, like 10 days ago, we finally got local state DHS assigned people to become pretty active and concerned about this, and they were able to get the local state CISA guy involved in this, and they are trying to look into it and do something about it. But we've given this information to the FBI a couple of times. They seem to be utterly uninterested in the fact that foreigners are housing and controlling our votes, and we find it amazing. And so that's why we went to Kevin Freeman and we started making our series of videos, because we finally decided that if we couldn't get the government to pay attention to it without public opinion and public pressure, the best guy to go to would be Kevin. And of course, he was great because he just took and ran with it.
Yeah, Russ, I appreciate that. You helped me with that transition. In fact, that's exactly what I was going to mention. For those of you who, this is the tip of the iceberg, you're probably very curious to see all the detail of Russ's investigation. Kevin Freeman covered that in one of his excellent segments on the economic war room with Kevin Freeman. It's featured on Blaze TV. I'd like to invite you, Kevin, if you would, to give the audience just a quick little background about your TV show, and we will make the commitment to you all to provide a hyperlink to that very segment and others. But Kevin, let me turn it over to you to talk a little bit about your show and how it is that you really became to be interested in this topic of economic warfare.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy, so much. We actually have a show. It's on Blaze TV. It's called Economic War Room with Kevin Freeman. And every show, it comes out weekly on Thursdays, and every show is accompanied by a battle plan, which is a PDF document ranging from 30 to 80 pages, depending on the topic. So whatever topic we're talking about, we recap the show in a PDF document, then we explain some of the intricacies, we provide links to backup research, and then we provide action plan steps. If you don't like election fraud, what do you do about it? In the case of working with Russ, we've actually done 4 shows, I believe, with Russ and his group, including one with a behind the scenes hacker. You can't see his voice or hear his voice or see him because he is so known in the hacker community. But he just walks through everything Russ just said, and you can see that you can actually hack a voting machine. And that's not because he's such a great hacker. He himself says that at one of the hacker conferences, 11 and 12-year-olds were able to break into any voting system on the planet. I mean, that's how vulnerable these things are. So working with Russ and his team, we set up a special website, economicwarroom.com/myvote. And we've got several of the videos with Russ. We've got a link to the battle plan on what you do about it. And then other articles that Russ and his team have said, hey, here's an article of proof that this is going on. So we've addressed that. Election fraud is economic because whoever controls the White House and the Congress controls your money. They have taxing authority and everything else. And so this is a very strong economic issue. It's a pocketbook issue, and it matters to all Americans. If someone's able to steal the votes and control the election, they can control where you're investing, your pocketbook, how much you get paid, and all of that, whether or not you even have a job in some cases. So this is an economic issue. And I deal with economic warfare. I've been in the investment business for, since 1983. And I've been working with the national security community since 2008. On the real economic risks that we see that could hinder America's national security.
But Kevin, I appreciate all the work that you've done, and I have to commend to the viewers, your program is excellent. I've personally subscribed and find myself routinely going back to search for episodes and battle plans to send to people who need your wisdom. One of the things I'd like to do is to transition this concept of hacking from the thought of a cyber hack into the systems, as Russ just explained for us, and to talk about a workaround, another way that our elections could be affected, and in particular through economic warfare. Kevin, if you would give us a little history on your experience studying the Chinese doctrine, or if it's not doctrine, at least it's military writings in unrestricted warfare, and what you observed that took place in 2008.
Yeah, and Hans has spoken of at the individual level, particularly with mail-in ballots, how your vote can be stolen from you or fake votes, false votes can be put in. Russ has talked a bigger picture, election fraud, how the system can be hacked. There is another step, and it took place in 2008 before our very eyes. And I'm going to tell you just a couple of things that everybody knows, and then I'm going to put a twist on it. First off, everybody knows that in 2008, Barack Obama and Joe Biden won in a landslide against John McCain and Sarah Palin. 2008, everybody knows that the stock market crashed and it nearly took down our economy. Trillions and trillions of dollars were lost. It's not a coincidence. And in fact, the research that I did for the Department of Defense, the research I've written about in my books and so forth, points out that the Chinese military has written this book, Unrestricted Warfare, and in it says a single man-made stock market crash is a new concept weapon. We walked through how that crash took place. What you probably don't remember is that on September 11th, 2008, McCain, Palin were leading in the polls, not slightly. They were leading by about as much as the claim is that Biden's leading Trump now. Regularly, consistently, 5 to 10 points every time, because Barack Obama was considered an untested senator. He'd only been there a couple of years. They didn't expect that he would be the next president. But then the economy collapsed. And what we found was evidence of groups in the Middle East, evidence of the Russians and others that were working to crash our economy right in the midst of a housing bubble. And when they did that and the economy flipped, there was no way that McCain, Palin could win. And in fact, what we found looking throughout history, anytime the economy goes down in an election year right before the election, the party in power loses power. And it was Republicans in power and they lost. And it's not just me saying this. George Soros said this very blatantly in January. He said he laughed at President Trump for being excited because the economy was doing so well in January. And then he said, you know, there's all kinds of revolutionary things that could happen before the elections in November. If the election were held today, Soros said Trump would win in a landslide. But in a revolutionary situation, you know, lots of things could happen. And we've seen, you know, COVID, we've seen stock market attacks. I'm very concerned that the Chinese know how to crash our stock market. They've made it clear they want one candidate over another, and that they will infiltrate our economy to cause people to be disrupted and thus put their person in power in the White House.
Well, Kevin, I think that the viewers probably can sense the reality that the Chinese have absolutely conducted economic warfare upon us with the virus, which we call it the CCP virus, COVID-19, by allowing it to exit that country and essentially bring the rest of the world's economy down. What I'd like you to do is to tell us a little bit more specifics. I've read your book, Secret Weapon. I would commend it to anyone else interested in this topic to read Kevin's book, Secret Weapon. It goes through a number of specific methods by which, if it were the Chinese, the Saudis, the Russians, whoever it is, those specific methods by which they can manipulate the stock market to cause such a crash. Kevin, if you would, without getting into too great a detail, go over just some of the wave tops of those specific techniques and the ways that we could guard against them, and whether or not we've done that or not to this point.
Well, there are a lot of ways that you could hack the stock market, you know, direct hacking and so forth. But I'll give you one that's a very real example that we saw that happened in 2013, where the Syrian Electronic Army, which is far less capable than the Chinese PLA, the Syrian Electronic Army hacked into the Associated Press Twitter feed. And we know Twitter feeds can be hacked. It happened recently where Twitter executives had their feed hacked. You know, Jack Dorsey and others have had their feed hacked. They hacked into one very specific Associated Press feed, and they put out one single tweet. And the tweet said, "White House hit, President hurt." That was it. It was false, completely fake news. But instantly, the trading algorithms of the New York Stock Exchange and all the high frequency traders saw that on the feed without one person recognizing it. It was just automatically triggered selling. 70% of our stock market trading is done by high frequency algorithms that no human being understands or sees happening. It's just they pick up some statement in the news and they just run with it. It is possible to hack news feeds, and they could put out a narrative that would cause the stock market to crash. I would imagine that most of the major high frequency algorithm traders have had their algorithms hacked at one time or another, so they know exactly what the trigger is, or they could place triggers in that would never be found or never seen. Just a news trigger like that caused the stock market to lose hundreds of billions of dollars. That could happen again and trigger a tsunami of selling that would cause a collapse of our stock market, a collapse of the economy, and it would impact the election.
And that's just one technique, just a single technique. And Kevin, what's been done about that? I mean, that vulnerability, is there something that can be done about that specific vulnerability?
Well, they had a big meeting in the House of Representatives and testimony following a different crash, which was known as the flash crash, trying to find out what caused it. And in that testimony, they said we were wholly unprepared to stop a hacker of this type. Nobody expects somebody to try and hack and crash a stock market because it's not economic. You don't make money from doing it. And so they were wholly unprepared, and they really don't have a solution. I've proposed a solution that was put in place in 1937 by Joe Kennedy, but unfortunately taken out in 2007 by the Securities Exchange Commission. Nothing has been done to date since then to stop the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Okay, and what was that recommendation that you said was put in and then for years maintained and then taken out?
It's a very simple rule. It's known on Wall Street as the uptick rule, because there are a lot of players on Wall Street that try and make money from the decline in value of a stock. They're called short sellers. And so before you could sell short to try and push a stock down, you had to wait for a tick up. So somebody had to buy at a higher price before you could sell again. And Joe Kennedy, who was the first chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission, realized that this would stop the catastrophic selling that we saw in 1929, 1930, 31, 32, that was a part of the Great Depression. So he put that very simple rule in place, and it served effectively until 2007, when the SEC, which was under the influence of Bernie Madoff to some extent then, decided, well, we don't need that rule anymore. It's kind of archaic, and they pulled it out. A lot of good people, Leon Cooperman, Charles Schwab, even George Soros himself, Jim Cramer of CNBC, have admitted that if you put that back, that would stop short sellers and especially high-frequency traders from crashing our markets.
Wow, what a simple solution it seems, and common sense that we need to figure out how to make that happen. Kevin, I appreciate the summary, and I appreciate you mentioning that one possible solution. I know that your economic battle plans have many more. What I'd like to do is take a few minutes before we go into the Q&A. I want to invite each one of our participants to provide some recommendations. They brought up a series of vulnerabilities and issues with the integrity of our election system. I'd like them to each provide a series of recommendations. Now, Kevin, you just provided one about the reinstatement of the uptick rule. I'd invite you at the moment, if you have any other recommendations that you can share, and then we'll turn over to Russ for his.
Sure. The most important thing the viewers can do is to get educated, step number one. And to do that, economicwarroom.com. I know we're on Blaze TV, which is a pay service. We put as much information free as we can on our website, particularly the /myvote. So get educated, read the battle plans. You will be blown away with all of the things that you can be doing to help stop this. The second thing is to share this information. We've got a Facebook and a Twitter feed. You can go on and read that. You can take the battle plans. They're free. You can download them. You can send them to senators and congressmen and just the people that you know and work with. Because the more people we get aware of this, the better prepared we will be if someone is trying to manipulate the election, and I'm certain they are, whether that's with mail-in ballots or whether that's with hacking. And if we're aware and can stand up, even a small percentage of the population is a large number in real terms. If we stand up now, we can make a real difference. And the third recommendation is, of course, to put back in the uptick rule. I've sent that to the White House. If you know anyone that could recommend that, please do. And there's a whole petition and everything else in our battle plan telling you how to do it.
Outstanding. Well, Kevin, we'll make sure that we take the links from that battle plan, the specific Economic War Room link and the petition link, and we'll put it really after this webinar in the article that's written underneath it so viewers can take action. Next, I'd like to go to Russ. Now, Kevin, on your segment, when you interviewed Russ, he explained a lot of this, but I do think it's valuable because I think, Russ, you've even matured your recommendations even further at this point. If you would, bring up that slide again for us and show us those vulnerabilities that you mentioned and what could be done about those cyber vulnerabilities.
Okay. Can you see the slide? Here we go. Show my screen.
There it is. We got it.
Yep, you got it. Okay. What you're looking at here is, let me go back just a second. What you're looking at here are some recommendations that we would have for the various cyber vulnerabilities that we have seen. And this won't cure them all, but it will certainly disrupt a lot of problems. So let me run through these. On election day, your votes go to this server. There is a local person conducting that election. In this case, we just use the name ES&S. They conduct supposedly and put the votes together, which goes to Clarity and their AWS cloud, and Seidel and their AWS cloud. And as we mentioned earlier, all of these are vulnerable points. This is vulnerable because the operator can do things just as simple as taking his laptop, loading changed votes here, and replugging them into the system. So there's several points that need to be looked at. The first one I would suggest is we need to be monitoring the network itself to make sure that outsiders cannot access the system, whether they are foreign outsiders or domestic. And we have seen numerous shells of various outside players embedded in our local voting company software. How would you do that? Well, the way you do that is actually very similar to the way that the intelligence companies, NSA, FBI, etc., protect their networks. You can sort of think of it as a government VPN that people have to register in order to be able to access through that VPN all of these databases and systems. And the government would log it, would monitor it, and would police it to make sure that votes cannot be changed from outsiders. The next thing is that local operators need to be required to have the keystrokes and screenshots software installed so that you can actually monitor the keystrokes and screenshots and see if some monkey business took place. The problem you've got is that this software, as we said earlier, is so vulnerable and so porous that you can change votes and then you can change the audit trail. You can also erase the audit trail in certain systems. And so if you don't catch it in real time through a keystroke and screenshot software, you actually won't see it. So when you hear government reports about, well, we know there are vulnerabilities, but we didn't see any actual votes change, of course not, because the audit trails are so easy to get rid of. For that same reason, the rest of these network communications need to be monitored and they need to be logged so that people know that if they play in this system, there will be a real-time capture of what they did and they will be then held responsible. And then probably the last point, which sort of gets into Hans's area, is we need to start looking really seriously at the mail-in versus early voting for duplications. As Hans outlined, it's very easy in a lot of these states to put your mail-in ballot in an envelope, go to one place, precinct voting, and vote there, and then go to another place and hand them your ballot. So that needs to be addressed as well.
Russ, I appreciate you sharing those recommendations. We're going to go finally to Hans. If you would, Hans, you covered everything from ballot harvesting to mail-in voting to registration issues. Give us a quick summary of the types of things you would like to see done and the policy recommendations of the Heritage Foundation on this matter.
Well, first of all, every state needs a voter ID law, a law that requires you to show a government-issued photo ID when you vote, whether it's in person or through an absentee ballot. Second, states all need to be requiring proof of citizenship when individuals register to vote. And states need to do a better job of verifying the information on voter registration forms. I'll give you just two quick examples of that. Look, the Department of Homeland Security has a huge database of aliens in the country, both people who are here legally and individuals who are here illegally who've at some point been detained or arrested and a record's been created. That information is available to all U.S. employers. In fact, they're required by federal law to check when they're hiring somebody. They're supposed to check with DHS to make sure the person they're hiring is a U.S. citizen or an alien who's here legally has a work permit. States aren't using those DHS databases to, again, verify citizenship information of people who are registering to vote. They're also not taking part in systems that have been set up with other states to find individuals who are registered in more than one state to prevent the kind of problem that Russ has been talking about. And that's just a simple thing that they ought to be doing. They're not taking advantage of other kinds of data. And again, I'll give you an example of this. The Public Interest Legal Foundation just released a report in which they took a look at voter registration addresses in states all over the country, compared that information to commercial databases, including credit agency data. And you know what they found? They found tens of thousands of individuals who are not registered at their home address, which is a requirement in every state, but are registered at commercial addresses like UPS stores. Now, that's a pretty clear sign that there's some kind of fraud going on. And yet, county governments, when they're registering people, they aren't checking that. They're not checking to make sure that somebody who's registering to vote is really registering at a resident's address, and they can easily do that. Why? Every county government has tax records. They know every single piece of property in their county. They know whether it's a vacant lot or a single family home or a UPS store, and yet they're not checking basic things like that. All of these are things that states could do, and they need to not accept some of the reforms, so-called reforms, being pushed by the progressive left, such as one of the biggest ones, automatic voter registration. The left has been pushing the idea that when you go in, for example, to get a driver's license, rather than what happens now, which is the DMV clerk asks you, do you want to register? You are automatically registered without your permission if you were in there getting a driver's license. Well, the problem with that is, for example, aliens can get a driver's license if you're here legally in every single state. And in more than a dozen states, dozen and a half states now, if you're an illegal alien, you can get a driver's license. The states that are now doing this, like California, they don't have really measures in place to prevent, for example, illegal aliens who are getting a driver's license from registering to vote. So there's everything from new laws that need to be put in, like voter ID, to just taking advantage of the many other government databases that are there to verify and check the information on voter registration forms. None of that's being done.
Gosh, well, what we're going to do after this webinar is take all of what Hans has suggested, what Kevin suggested, what Russ has suggested, and put it in a set of action steps. I would like to turn to Q&A. I know we only have about 8 minutes left. I'm very grateful for the nearly 100 people who are on right now watching. Adam Savitt is going to help us with the moderation of those questions, and then what we'll do is whoever of the guests feels most inclined, just go ahead and start with that answer. We'll just take one answer per question so we can get through a few of them. Adam, why don't you start with those?
Sure. Please talk about HR 1 if Biden is elected and Dems capture the Senate and keep the House. And for the audience, that's a Dem-sponsored with the stated goal to expand Americans' access to the ballot box, reduce the influence of big money in politics, and strengthen ethic rules for public servants and for other purposes.
Well, I can answer that because I actually testified against HR 1 when it was introduced. It tells you something that the very first bill that Democrats introduced into the House and passed when they took over control in 2018 was a bill that would have basically led to a federal takeover of the election process. One of the best things the framers of the Constitution did was allow states to run their own elections, including federal elections. HR 1 would have been a complete takeover of the election process by the federal government, and it had all kinds of terrible provisions in it to basically restrict political speech, restrict political spending, and worse, get rid of security protocols that some of the states have put in. The best example of that is it would have outlawed any state having a voter ID law. And you can see that would have been a very, very bad idea.
Well, Hans, on that real quick, you had mentioned that there was no national voter registry system. Is that different if there were a national registry system? That's not what we're talking about, right?
No, what they were talking about, no. There is no national voter registration system. There's been discussion of that. There are folks who say they don't really want the federal government having control over that. They do want states to run things to avoid people in Washington being able to manipulate election results.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you, Hans. I appreciate it. Adam, next question.
Yeah, for Russ, has anyone actually been able to explain the change in Bevan's votes? I guess the reason and the mechanics of it.
No, as a matter of fact, they haven't. There were people who contacted CNN at the time who made the statement there was no comment. We then went and talked to a person who used to be the director of the election night reporting at CNN, and that person couldn't possibly explain it. We went to a couple of other media organizations, showed them the video, and said, "Can you explain this?" And they were all at a loss to explain how in the world votes in real time could go down in the exact same number that they went up for the other fellow.
Wow.
One viewer mentions petition for paper ballots only. Is that something that's realistic or that advisable, you think?
Actually, that's our very favorite solution, is pure return to paper ballots. We actually had a much more secure election in the 80s and 90s than we did when we brought in all of this electronic voting stuff. The move towards area voting and away from precinct voting is a bad move. The move to use ballot marking devices, that's where you have to go in and mark your ballot and it prints out a little piece of paper that you think is your ballot, but it's really not, because the reader doesn't read that ballot. It reads a bunch of barcodes. You can't tell what that barcode is really saying. And so we really ought to get back to precinct voting on real paper that you fill in yourself, hand marked, and is also human readable in order to eliminate at least that portion of the problem in the voting. And by the way, numerous cybersecurity experts recommend the exact same thing, and cyber's our deal. So if we're recommending you shouldn't have it, you really ought to think pretty seriously about it.
This question is about the so-called red mirage that left-wing commentators are talking about, where the Trump wins on election night, but then it slowly evaporates with the mail-ins. So what psychological or cyber methods might be used to support that narrative after election day?
Hans, you want to take that or you want me to?
Well, they're talking about cyber, so that's probably your bailiwick.
Okay, well, the cyber is real simple. As I mentioned in my deal, election night reporting goes through and says a certain amount of votes went here, there, and wherever else. That's the unofficial side. But there's lots of time to then play with all the votes that come in later and have them be awarded, or to harvest undervotes in the computer. That's where you went through the ballot and you skipped a race, you didn't even vote in that race. Well, the problem is hackers can easily go back and grab that unmarked race and award it to one person or another. So the ability to change the vote one way or another after the election is very significant. And of course, once election night's over, then you know exactly how many votes need to change in order to elect the other fellow. So it's a problem.
All right, so Tommy, I think we're out of time.
We kind of are. The good thing is that we've Adam's captured the other questions. I'll take a moment after this to try to address those and see if it can be written as answers in the little article that we're going to publish. While we still have you, though, folks, I do want to let you know an incredible blessing that the center has recently had, that its founder, Frank Gaffney, has now begun a television show. That television show is at americasvoice.news. Very soon, it should have its own tab. Frank is now filming every day and has had Hans on his program thus far, and will consistently be covering this topic, among others, on that program. I'll be sure to put a link to that in the article that's written after this. And in the meantime, I would just ask everyone who hasn't yet checked out that americasvoice.news to do so, because from at least my observation, there's a lot of truth telling going on there, and the types of things that the Center for Security Policy cares about, which Americans need to know about, It's just one more platform for us to use. So with that, thank you for sticking with us for a full hour and for participating. We'll be sure again to publish an article with the recording of this so that you can share that to all your friends and family and network and give them the same information that you just got and the recommendations on just what to do about it to secure freedom. Thanks a lot, folks.